small suburban town in Missouri, there was a high school known for its mysterious history. An urban legend had been going around for years that a malevolent monster lurked within the night of the high school halls. Within the last few days, rumors had gone round that another group of teenagers had fallen victim to this monstrous entity. The locals started to seem apathetic towards the topic of the monster, and they seemed to be desensitized to any gossip regarding it either. Late one night, after days of discussion, a group of determined teenagers decided to investigate the rumors. Their friends were one by one going missing, and nobody seemed to bat an eyelid towards this. As they walked towards the high school, they felt weird seeing it so quiet. Usually the sounds of kids playing could be heard, but at this time of night, it was just an eerie, dead silence. They stood at the school gate and mulled over if they should turn back and just head home. But instead, they climbed over the school gate and proceeded further. As they sneaked into the school building, they noticed that all of the lights were flickering on and off. Eerie shadows were cast on the walls, but the group continued on regardless, as the need to solve this would make all of their problems fade away. Or so they believed. As the clock struck midnight, strange noises echoed through the corridors. If you listened well enough, you could just make out a small sound, but it was so faint that it was hard to even notice it. The students seeking answers kept looking around the dark high school building. The only clue they had was that all of the children had gone missing late at night when they stayed behind at school. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the building, and at the same time, all of the light bulbs in their flashlights simultaneously popped. As panic filled the air, their hearts started to pound with fear. Without even time to process everything that just had happened, suddenly amidst the darkness, they caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure darting between classrooms. An audible gasp echoed through the room as one of the office chairs started floating. It moved around slowly, almost like it was dancing to a tune, and then violently it flew towards the students, grazing one of them on the cheek, and smashed into the wall behind them. After that ordeal, the students dusted themselves off and turned around to face the exit. But what met them in return was red eyes glowing menacingly at them. It was very hard to make out what exactly it was, but the red eyes were enough to freak all of the students out. In the corner of the room was a small speaker that was often used to alert students that class had finished. Suddenly it started crackling, and it seemed to distract this thing. The brave students looked at each other, nodded, and ran right past the monster. A couple of moments later, a booming sound blasted through the school. The sound could only be described as something similar to the foghorn of a large ship. The blast from the sound was powerful enough to break some of the nearby classroom windows, and at that moment, the teens realized they were being hunted. A few days before they snuck into the high school, the three friends had a conversation, and they had said that if things were to get dangerous, that each one of them would hide in their own locker and come out when the staff had returned to the school in the morning. Each one of them knew what to do, and they ran to their own personal school locker, got inside, and hid. Their attempts to try and evade only enraged this thing more, as it relentlessly zipped from room to room to try and find them. It had been a good while now since the three friends had hid inside their school lockers. It seemed that back at home, one of their parents had awoken from sleep to find their son's bedroom empty and tried calling him to see where he was. The high schooler was smart enough to put his mobile on low volume, but unfortunately was not smart enough to turn off vibrate. The high school was deathly silent, and the vibrations from the mobile sounded like a helicopter taking off. Almost instantly, something started maneuvering around the room, desperately searching for the loud vibrations. Out of nowhere, a voice could be heard. It was a familiar voice that sounded like the voice of their lovely art teacher, Miss Levine. She told them all to come out now, that the big bad monster had run away, and that their friends were all here waiting for them. Two of the students stayed put, but the third student opened his locker and embraced Miss Levine. The other two froze in fear when they remembered that Miss Levine had been missing for about 2 weeks now. Before they could even react, a loud scream echoed through the hallway, and immediately they knew whose scream it was. They both simultaneously opened their lockers and walked for about 30 seconds towards their friend's locker. What met them right in front of the locker was his now broken mobile phone, and their friend nowhere to be seen. They both turned to each other as if looking at the other for guidance. They both stood there silently in disbelief at what had just occurred. With fear uniting them, they looked at each other. Regardless of the peril they were in, they both agreed that they had come so far now, that the adults had all given up hope, and it had fallen to them to uncover the truth. Determined to end the nightmare, the remaining survivors marched forward towards the sports hall. Mere moments away from the hall, they could hear the voice of their friend inside calling out to them, which caused them to walk faster. They turned to each other and nodded, gripped the sports hall door handle and opened it in unison, only to freeze in horror at what was before them. Instead of their friend, what they saw standing in the middle of the large hall was this large, black, shadowy creature with their friend's face protruding from the inside of the creature's body. It seemed like it had perhaps absorbed him, and it had been doing that for some time, using familiar voices to lure others and trick them into falling for its insidious trap. Armed with one working flashlight, they shone it directly onto the demon, and in doing so it grew larger and more foreboding. and then making the students feel absolute fear. It started laughing, and more faces appeared all over its twisted body. The faces of their missing friends and teachers, and also people they didn't even know, started calling out to them. "Let us be one," they said. Peace was obtainable. A world without pain exists.
Your friends are waiting here.
Join us. For a moment, the high school students had started to feel powerless. They were being pulled in, and within the midst of everything, a faint sound in the distance could be heard. What was that sound? And why could they hear it now? And then, like a plate dropping on the floor, both of them snapped out of their trance and realized the sound they heard was birdsong, which must mean that it was almost morning and the sun was arriving. Before the cold, lifeless embrace of the demonic entity that was walking towards them, they both ran in separate directions. It now screaming with displeasure, it started to give chase after one of them. However, now it seemed to forego any trickery, and it started to go on the attack. This thing started to bounce on the floor like a large ball until it bounced directly on top of one of them, and it started to greedily envelop him like a blanket. The demon was so giddy with pleasure that it didn't notice the sound of mechanical gears activating behind it. Finally, the creature turned to face the last remaining student. The demon, mockingly, now wearing both of her friends' faces, it rushed towards her. Screams reverberated throughout the whole school. However, the screams were not from the student. It was in fact from the creature. It seemed that during the chase, the remaining student had activated the sport hall's rusty shutters, and it had now finally opened, and morning filled the sports hall with sunlight. The creature, twisting in pain, had now released the student it just moments earlier tried to absorb, and with him, others it had previously captured too were dropping out of it. The creature, once bigger than a large brown bear, was now no bigger than a small dog. All of its sustenance released, it started crawling slowly towards an open air vent. A tiny smile etched onto its face as it touched the front panel of the air vent, only to be brutally crushed beneath the shoes of the three brave students. The weak creature, now extinguished and burnt away by the purifying sunlight. The three brave friends who entered the high school alone at night and outsmarted this wickedness were reunited once again. They had done the unthinkable. They solved the mystery. Everything would be better again. Shortly afterwards, teachers and students flooded the sports hall for their usual morning assembly, only to see the three students crying and hugging each other, and the pile of missing students and a single teacher all passed out right next to the three survivors. Months later, even though they had been within the creature for months, most of the people were fine and didn't remember anything after being swallowed by the creature. Some who had been taken for longer, and in some cases many years, had unfortunately died. It seemed though that this creature had been doing this for a very, very long time, as the belongings of one of his victims had dropped too when the creature unwillingly released those trapped within itself. A small journal with dates going back some hundreds of years was found amongst the survivors. The happenings of that night were buried and never talked of again. The diary had shed some light, and it seemed as if the creature's existence was known to the adults of this town, and the sacrifices were to appease the wrath of the monster. It seemed as if the teacher was absorbed by accident. Maybe she was too close to a student who had been pulled in to the creature. Some years following this event, it seemed like the disappearances started up again in the small Missouri town. And again, the adults of the town were apathetic to the missing people. It is believed that the town was heavily involved in the witch trials of years ago, and this may have been a curse put on them from that time. However, what we do know for certain is that this is now another addition to the Haunted Archives.